Hello, everybody, and welcome to our curtain call discussion of Portland Stage's presentation of Winnipesaukee Playhouse's production of Or by Liz Duffy Adams. I'm your host, Todd Backus, and today I'm joined by the cast of Or with Rebecca Tucker's Aphra Behn, Haley Jones as Nell Gwynn and others, and Nicholas Wilder as King Charles II and others. And we're also joined by Macy Downs, one of our directing and dramaturgy interns, and the AD and dramaturg of Or. I know that a bunch of you will just be itching to ask some questions of these lovely, lovely actors. And so if you want to drop that in the chat, we'll pitch those to the actors and see where it goes. You can also use the Q&A feature. I'll be keeping an eye on that as well. But to get the ball rolling, to get you thinking about the play, I have some questions for the actors. So to start, Rebecca, Haley, and Nick, would you mind telling our audience just where you're from and how long you've been acting when you got the bug?
Me first. Also, shout out to my parents. Hi, Dad. I see your chat. And Mom. I'm originally from Boone County, Kentucky, where I was born and raised. Yeah. Hey, y'all. And then I moved to New York City, where I just celebrated my 6-year anniversary of living there. So I'm a New Yorker now, but by way of Southern roots. And I think I've had the acting bug since I was quite little. I think my parents could attest to that. So yeah, the bug bit me early on.
I'm originally from California, like a little desert town in the middle of nowhere in Southern California. And I've been in New York for 8-ish years now. So yeah, I consider myself a New Yorker too. I started doing theater. My middle school put on a production of A Christmas Carol. And the way that it was cast, every student got to be in it. So in every scene, Scrooge was played by a different kid, and the ghosts were each played by a different kid in each scene. And so I, being the little bit of a brat that I was, realized that Jacob Marley only has one scene. So if I played Jacob Marley, I would get to be the only Jacob Marley. And so I played Jacob Marley, and ever since then I was just obsessed.
She's the only Aphra Behn in this show. I'm from Philadelphia. I have moved to New York, I guess about 8 or 9 years ago. I got the acting bug a little bit later. I was a junior in college, studying English and psychology. And I did a study abroad in London, and I saw a bunch of theater, and I fell in love, and I said, I'm going to become an actor. And then I'm doing Or at Portland Stage now, and the rest is history.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So for those of you in our audience who haven't seen this show yet, just a bit of a setup. We are in the Restoration period in London. This is just near the end of the plague, first go round. There's a couple, there's a couple of those. But it centers around Aphra Behn, a spy and writer and playwright of some renown, as well as Nell Gwynn, an actress on the stage, and Aphra's sponsor? How do we want to phrase that? Lover / supporter, King Charles II. As well as some other characters that Haley and Nicholas get to play during this piece that kind of whirl around Aphra over the course of one long evening, which I think is very delightful. And so shifting gears a little bit to talk about the show, what was one of the favorite things that each of you learned about either these characters or this time period, or just cool things that Liz Duffy Adams put into this play that were true, that was a fun, oh, this was a cool line, and also?
Yeah, I'll take it. Nell Gwynn, researching her was really cool because she is such an icon of this time period. you go to London, there's tons of bars and pubs still named like the Nell Gwyn pub. Yeah. And my favorite thing I learned was her relationship with Charles II in real life was very special. And all the writing around it centers around their love of each other's brains, their love of each other's wit, and how they used to have these conversations literally on the other side of a fence where they would just talk for hours, making each other laugh. And I just find that so interesting with this time period. So I love that. And some of the lines, there is one line in the show that's a direct Nell Gwyn quote from the time period where she says, "I've already had 2 lovers called Charles, so you'll be my Charles III." That's actually one of her real life quotes in like folklore from the time period. Yeah, so I love learning that. And Liz Duffy Adams gives her a lot of nods to that. Nell talks a lot about wit and being witty and loving words. So it was fun to latch onto that.
I think for me with Aphra, one of the things that Liz Duffy Adams has really done is reading Aphra's plays is so fascinating. She was writing about queerness. She was writing about all of these things that she was so ahead of her time for. And I love the way that that's sort of built into the show. One of my favorite nuggets, though, that Liz Duffy Adams has put in is this question. There's a lot of debate about whether or not Aphra Behn was actually married. We're just not sure. She claims that she was, but there's really no documentation of it. And so that's a big question that comes up. And it comes up in the show at a pretty important moment as well. And Eileen, our brilliant director, basically just told me, make a choice for yourself and you live that moment truthfully. And I think that's so fun that Liz Duffy Adams also doesn't answer it. She just presents this question, which is just really fun to like dig into.
Yeah, I love the tone of the show. I feel like when you really embrace the like is it a comedy or is it a drama, and it really shifts so quickly. And I think that's been very fun to sort of get to try and find that balance and try and figure out like what is happening in these scenes, and they change so quickly. It's just a very challenging, fun play. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then Macy, I'd also love to loop you into this part of the conversation. Was dramaturgically, was there something that you found like really fascinating and cool about this show and this moment?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the coolest things about researching this show was that like the historical backdrop of this show is very much like, oh, we are in a plague, and like a lot of theaters are shut down or like are shutting down depending on like how many people are dying of the plague each week. It was like if 30 people die in a week, like the theater shut down. And I think it was really cool for me to kind of put our own like historical moment that we're living in and like making theater during this moment into like a larger context like that, and realize that, oh, theater like will always be here even when like plagues are happening and theater has to be shut down. Like people always want to watch theater, and that was really cool for me to realize like, oh, this is like a unique moment, but also this has happened before in different ways.
Mm-hmm. I also think in reflecting on it, like something that's changed for me about this play since even January was there's a speech, I think it's between Nell and Aphra, but I'm not sure who's talking at this point. But one of you is talking about like, we've gone from this very conservative Puritan era to this like new liberated, like we can be who we want, we can love who we want, we can do all of these things. And this moment of big hope that having read this play, years ago, and then over the summer, and then in January has like shifted in meaning for me, different points of the show. And I think it's a really like cool and timely piece in a number of different ways. Kind of jumping back to, you all did the show this summer, and I'm wondering what are some things with that in mind that have shifted just meaning for you? Like what are things that like meant one thing over the summer and feel like they have a different meaning now?
The fact that you just brought up that moment is so interesting because that's the answer to that's my answer. That exact moment in the show and that scene, it is in fact between us. Well, I could be many people, between Nell and Aphra. And it was interesting over the summer. Just one of the lines in that scene, without giving much away, is I get to say to audience members that I could see their eyeballs sitting outside, I would say, "We are lucky to be alive right now." And over the summer, that whole monologue and that whole moment in the scene was very joyful from Nell. It was much more a celebration of life and to get to be alive and just a gift, which I felt at that moment in the pandemic was where I was feeling like there is hope. This is happening. Like, here we are. Now, all these months later, further in the pandemic, with the election, with everything happening, this scene had much more gravitas. And that statement of "we are lucky to be alive right now" is more of a plead to Aphra saying, don't you realize how far we've come? Taking into consideration queer identity and representation in the theater, taking into consideration a world that could be ready for different kinds of people and different kinds of love and art, and for a woman to be all these things and be many things at once. And I think it's cool because it's Nell's whole point is that she's kind of fought up from nothingness to be something. And now she's sharing with Aphra, no, we are lucky to be living right now because we get to do all these things that all these women in particular before us couldn't do. Mm-hmm. So it is more pleading now. It has a lot more grounded weight to it.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, I have two very specific moments, and one is at the very beginning and one is at the very end, which is funny. The first one is I have this speech very early on, looking out the window of a prison cell, talking about looking at the city and the city being devastated. I say plague has brought our city down and war keeps it in poverty disguised, and I don't recognize it. And over the summer that we played that monologue very, very angry and very ranty, and it was very fast. And when I was rereading the play to work on this production, I had a phone call with Eileen and I told her it's hitting me in a different way just reading it, because this idea, and it was very shortly after the January 6th events at the Capitol too. And so this idea that you look out at the world that you know and that you love and you don't recognize it, that there have just been thing after thing after thing that has altered what you know reality to be, and what that feels like resonated with me in a completely different way this time around. So that was very cool to be able to revisit those words and come at it in a different emotional place. And then the other one is at the very end of the show, and this always hit me, the first production too, and it still hits me now, even with more weight, is this idea that do we dare hope after everything that's happened, after all the chaos of the world, after everything that people have lost? Do we dare hope? Do we invest in art? Do we still step forward and say, like, this has value in the world and I need to put it out there, you know? And I think that's the whole, for me, that's the whole show. And that resonated with me the first time. It resonates with me still. It's like the whole, you know, it's the weight of the show for me as an actor, and I think for Aphra as well.
Yeah. Nick?
Yeah, I would agree with the sort of ending sentiment of "Do we dare hope" is the thing that has resonated with me, because we thought, like, doing this show 6 months ago, like, we had defied all odds, that was the hardest going to be, and then somehow, like, numbers kept getting worse, and we still dared to make art. And I guess, you know, everyone connected with Portland and Winnipesaukee said, like, no, we will make this happen, and they did dare to hope and dare to make this theater dream work. But yeah, I feel like that line always resonates with me too, and more so in this production, because I guess we were 6 months into the pandemic the first time we did, and now we're about a year and we're still daring to hope. And I think it's a beautiful sentiment to end on. Yeah.
Absolutely. We have some questions that are popping up in the chat. For Rebecca, what is it like to confront a series of different people that you've built or build strong relationships with, but are played by the same two people? Like, how is that for you?
I love this question. It's amazing. It's so fun. And truly the reason why it's so fun is because these two are such good actors and such good scene partners that for me, like there was a moment when we first started rehearsing that I was like, anybody could walk through the door and I don't know. It was trying to get the order of the play. And it was just never an issue because their characters, the distinctions are so clear. They're so fun. The physicality is different. And for me as an actor, I had a very clear, it's very interesting to look at this play and see that she has these very strong relationships with these very different people. And so for me as an actor, a very helpful way into that was to look at what does she get from this relationship? What is the trigger for this relationship? What does this one give to her? And so the relationships themselves are so distinctly different. Mm-hmm. Based in like fun and excitement and based in just admiration or based in history and based in, this person knows me on a deeper level than anyone else ever will because they've known me for so long. And that for me was very helpful, but would have been impossible with actors who like couldn't also come in with just completely different personalities. They just made it so easy is the answer to the question.
We paid her to say that.
No, it really was just like when I was still sorting through my process of how do I connect with each of these people and how do I make it different and make each one unique? Mm-hmm. Those questions were answered by the characters that they brought into the room. Which was just lovely, just fun to work with.
Mm-hmm. For those of you who haven't seen the show, I can attest getting to see the designer run and knowing fully how this play works. I was delighted each time the door opened and someone new walked through and I was like, this feels like a very different person. And I know it's not. Like, I know this is Nick again in a different outfit, but like, wow. And it's a really delightful energy to watch. We have another question for the whole group from Ken. Do you all have any modern influences that inform your characters?
Any thoughts?
Well, to give you three a little time to think about that. For those of you in the audience, one of the things that I really love about the way Liz Duffy Adams sets up the show is she talks about it being set in sort of the 1660s and 70s, the 1960s and 70s, and echoes of today, whatever that means. And there's this really beautiful like play with time and tone that I think is really cool. And DW, the costume designer, actually talked about the costumes. One of the things that they were interested in doing was having like the silhouette of the late 1600s and the color palette of the late 1900s, which I thought was a really cool way to like blend times in different ways. But anyway, if any of you are thinking about any modern characters, cool. And if not, yeah.
I think there was definitely a moment in rehearsal where I tried to put in a little like, I don't know, what's the word?
Nod or
a little homage. Nod or homage to Laurie Metcalf. Because yeah, if anybody was able to see her do A Doll's House Part 2, she's one of the most brilliant actors I've ever seen live ever, and I adore her. And there's this moment in that play where she just flings her whole body to the ground. And there's just the most beautiful example of taking up every inch of space, even the floor. And so there was a moment that I was like, I'm just going to throw my body on the floor and see what happens. Yeah, so I think if I have a modern influence, I think I've really looked at, and that play, now that I think of it, does have a similar style of very period clothing and setting, but with a very modern sensibility. So I think maybe even subconsciously, I have probably pulled a lot from watching her do that. Yeah.
I think for mine, I don't know how modern, but Madeline Kahn and Carol Burnett are always going to be on my list of like influences and like dream goal humans to emulate. And I think you can see a little bit of that probably in Mariah, the maid character I play. She has sort of that broader, old comedic edge to her. And Mariah it's not really a person, but she's definitely based on, in my head, like Jersey Boys. Like for me, Mariah just like embodies Jersey Boys. And that's because I originally tried to find her voice by copying my grandmother, Jacqueline Jones. She has this amazing voice that I really can't copy. And in rehearsal, I was trying it and it just wasn't working out. And then I sort of latched into the other side of my family, which is like from Jersey, Italian. And that's what Mariah became. So I think I'm a hodgepodge of many things, which, that's what this play is all about. So
I would say I steal from John Cleese a fair amount for comedic stuff. But that's the only name that really jumps out.
Sure.
I'm not sure about, like, on this show, I feel like not as much. I feel like it was more about finding like the voices of these two guys and how to make them different, so there was no confusion when one came in of like, wait, was that him or is that him? So just making them just like different enough so you know who is who. But then finding like what sort of feels right for the character, and then just going with that.
Awesome. A question for Haley and Nick. I know that every time you're backstage, it's all about quick changes. How do you come out not just dressed, but really ready to play a scene?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the quick changes kind of throw you off your mental prep. A lot of times you get to like take a breath and be like, okay, now I'm going to enter this scene with this purpose. And sometimes with the quick changes, you're so discombobulated, you just walk on stage. And you just you're in the right costume, hopefully, and you assume you remember the line. But I don't actually know how I keep track of it. I think some muscle memory, to be honest, that we've done it like a lot of times. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts?
I don't know. I think that there's definitely like a sort of like, Shakespearean boldness be my friend kind of moment where you have to just be brave. Like there is no time to doubt yourself or what's happening. You have to just, I think in particular with my Lady Davenant one, where I just have to open that door on time and I will go. And that monologue in particular does not stop. So once you're on that train, you got to ride it or you're hit by it. So I definitely think just learning to be brave and just trust each other, trust these two amazing team partners that I'm so lucky to be with, and trust our dressers. It's all about this relationship backstage is as important as the one on stage, and having time to work with the interns who are amazing dressers and figure out a new language for us that worked really helps, because then you have that. I now in all my changes, knock wood, have at least a second to look them in the eyes and they're like, you got it. And then you just go for it.
Wonderful. I'd love to talk a little bit about like, because, we do all of our shows inside in a proscenium. And when y'all did this over the summer, it was outstage kind of on a thrust that we've reconstructed on our proscenium, but it's still a very different feel. And so what has that been like going from outside, it's, late afternoon, you can see everybody and look them in the eyes, to inside darkened theater, theatrical lights and all that jazz? Like, how's that been a different experience for you?
It's definitely been very different. I think there are things that I miss about being outside, and there are things that I love about being indoors. Outside had this sort of, there was always this sense that chaos could impede at any moment. And at times it did. Our opening performance outside was, we had rehearsed outside. We had run the show so many times outside at the exact time that the show was going to be running. And then for some weird reason, and then never again, our opening performance had a swarm of like 1,000 bugs.
Like a lot of bugs.
Like just everywhere in every scene. And we were like,
I was trying the bugs.
it was crazy. But it was beautiful. And it was just this sense that like, there was always going to be an element of chaos that was going to be out of our control that we would have to deal with. And I love that. I think that's so fun and theatrical and so part of this world anyway. But then you look at like the indoors, the outdoor production was very, very bare bones. We really had no set design. We had the little wooden outdoor stage that you see on stage at Portland Stage. That was literally all we had. And the costumes really became our set, became our dressing, which was really cool and fun and sort of just like simple, and we create the whole world. But in this version, in this indoor version, with all this extra space, my favorite element that we've added is the papers that spread across the front of the stage. And I start the show like reading on the corner, and this idea that every piece of work that Aphra has ever created exists in this space with her is stunning to me, and has really affected a lot of the sort of starting and ending points of the show in what I think is just a really beautiful way. So there's definitely things I love about both, and it is very different.
Yeah, I agree that there was a sense of chaos and sort of unpredictability with outside, that like there could be like motorcycles or chipmunks running around or what have you. And the inside does provide like a nice stability. And also it's like the perfect temperature and everything, and the acoustics are great. There are reasons why we do theater in a theater that are really nice. I will say that we have a fair amount of audience interaction, or at least direct address. And that has been different to not be able to see people as well. But I think it's still effective in talking to them because we still look at them. But that has been, I think, a challenge for all of us. Because we the lights were on the full show outside. And now it's different. But,
Yeah, same stuff. I do miss the sort of intimacy of the audience, even at a safe distance of the summer. They felt really present because there were daylight watching us, laughing at us, with us, hopefully. But I love the elements that were added indoors, the papers. And then what was so beautifully done is, I think something very special about our outdoor production was this idea that our director, Eileen, built the whole show with, was that we are going to build the world. We would enter from the theater and come outside to the amphitheater, and you would see us kind of create this world. And being outside, it really honored the Restoration period. It really honored where theater came from, like being on the ground with oranges like Nell Gwen. But what was cool about inside is the design of all these props around the stage and all these items. Some are used in the play, some are not. It's kind of fun, I think, for the audience to see like, oh, will they use that ladder? Will they use those candlesticks? She picked up that hat. It saved that element that was so precious to me outside, as we are going to create this world as almost a traveling troupe of clowns. And now indoors, the audience gets to see that still. So I thought that was brilliantly designed, and it's so fun to play in a literal world of theater. Like everything around you is so theatrical. It's really fun.
Absolutely. We have a question from Christine. Do the three of you have a warm-up together or alone that you do before the show?
We each do our own warm up. We don't really warm up as a crew.
So maybe we should. Maybe we should have a point. That'd be like a great bonding experience.
Nick and I touch all the oranges.
Yeah,
I have to be honest.
Backstage, we touch the oranges.
Bad luck not
to see which ones are extra squishy that day.
We do that.
Which ones are colder.
I do have I do not touch the oranges, but I do go through pre-show and touch everything that I touch in the show. Like I have to have hands on everything that I touch in the show prior to the show. But then other than that, I know we all are pretty diligent about warming up, but we tend to usually kind of get to our own spaces and take personal warm-ups.
I have another sort of superstitious thing I created myself where my 2 jackets all my characters have a jacket. That's what a brilliant costume design by DW to sort of differentiate them. And at the top of the show, 2 of the 3 are hanging out right on the stage. So I'm wearing one of them and I like to hold the hands of the other 2 and sort of unite all 3 women together. So I do it every time. One time I asked Nick if he'd like to hold Lady Davenant's hand and he said no. So
I was holding a lot of oranges at the time, as per pre-show touching of oranges.
He did have a lot of oranges.
I was trying to juggle them unsuccessfully.
That's true.
But they're still next week. I'll touch your sleeves.
Talking about costumes, we have a question about your corsets. I know that corseting is not always fun, but does achieve a silhouette that is common with this period. And given our talk earlier about the way that this show is both like modern and period at the same time, could the 2 of you talk about what that has been like, that journey in corseting?
2 of us? Or no?
It's hard. It's a challenge because I do think it's an element that was very important to Eileen and to Liz Duffy Adams, honestly, that the plays sort of live in that anachronistic place. And so the costumes are very period accurate. My corset, like, not only am I fully like cinched in, but it even has shoulder straps. So I can't even move my shoulders fully. So they're very limited in their mobility. They're very period accurate, which is really fun from an educational standpoint to kind of work with. But then to try to include this very modern movement and the freedom that modern movement gives you within the confines of a corset was definitely a challenge. But we had them very early on in the rehearsal process, so we were able to kind of try to figure that out right away. And I do think one of the things that made it fun was when you can't move this part of your body at all, where does energy live? And so Eileen brought up at one rehearsal, she was like, you guys are both so in your legs. You keep squatting and and we're like, kicking. And we were like, it's the only part of our bodies we can move. So there's a lot of that sort of in the world. But it definitely was hard to see, like, how do you commit to these really fun physical choices when you have that very period constraining corset.
Yeah, and like the not only the physical choices, which that was so beautifully put and so accurate, but also your vocal choices.
Oh yeah,
that's where I would struggle the most, was creating 100%. These different vocal ranges, particularly like Lady Davenant having, like, the thought in my head is the whole grand piano is the key, like that's the game. But then to be able to breathe, but you can't breathe because your ribs are quite cinched together in a steel plate. So where do you breathe from? And that's where I think a lot of the legs and the vocal training comes into play.
Yeah.
And my corset does not have the shoulders. But what's tricky about mine is doing some of the, the play is sometimes billed as a sex farce at times. And I think that comes to play most in Nick and one of our scenes together as Nell and Charles. And we're doing a lot of, like, Neil Simon-y kind of comedic stuff with our bodies, but I'm in a corset. And it's like, there's one time I'm upside down on his shoulder and the steel plate is sort of pressed into my ribs. And so learning to be able to have the comedic freedom and the athleticism that, like, we all love as actors. I could speak that all 3 of us are pretty athletic actors, but then having that confining structure around you is a really interesting game.
Yeah.
But Eileen helped us a lot, really, fight the corset in a good way. It was really fun to not be doing the importance of being earnest, which we've all done, where you are in the period accurate corset, but you are moving more from your arms and it's very stylized. It was really cool to find out approaching this play that we were going to break all the rules and sit all the ways you're not supposed to sit and navigate that and talk about it with DW. Our costume designer was very open to hearing there are certain things he definitely wanted, but then he would help in other ways and give us things to latch onto that would help. So it was a really cool explorative process, I think.
I definitely agree about the breath issue. And this ties back to warm-ups too. Haley and I both do all this breath work and diaphragm and opening up the voice. And then you put on a corset and it's the only way you can breathe is the exact way that you are trained not to, which is all shoulders and chest. It's that's the only place you can breathe from. But it's fun to sort of see these women who were sort of chucking tradition in their times, in their own ways, and then have that be a layer of it as well. It's really fun.
Awesome. I think we're rounding out on the end of this discussion, which has been such a lovely discussion. Thank you all for your questions in the chat. Thank you, actors, for all of your wonderful insights. As a fun little beat to leave us on, and I know, Rebecca, you'll be a little bit of a disadvantage with this question, but could y'all talk about your favorite quick changes?
I don't like quick changes. No. Do you have a favorite one?
I love watching yours. Does that count as an answer?
Yeah, I guess ones are my favorite that you guys do.
Yeah, I love watching Nick.
I suppose I have one where I go 4 times, and that's probably the most fun, where it goes from one guy to the second guy to the first guy to the second guy back to the first guy, and just that sort of ping pong aspect of it is pretty fun.
Not to give anything of the magic away, but Nick has one quick change where the cue line for his quick change to start is his line. And then the next line that's said is his line. And he has a quick change between them.
That's rude writing.
It's magical.
Yeah, Liz is watching this. That's a rude thing you did.
Magical. And also, there's that first time that I throw open the door and see Haley as Mariah with this stunning physicality, which if you've seen the show, and if you haven't yet, you will, is just so fun. It's just joyous to throw open the door and meet that character for the first time.
That's my fastest, I think, even though people would probably assume the one that comes after that, because I have a really fun, my favorite sequence of quick changing is all 3 of my characters back to back within a span of themselves. It is just a little circus in those 3 scenes. And I have a lot of fun. It's so I rip my clothes off. Actually, I run the back of the deck. I dive into dresses. It's ridiculous backstage. But nothing feels better than when she opens the door and I'm Mariah, because that's the fastest, deceivingly. We always think it's Lady D because she has so much happening and it's quite a dramatic change. But Mariah is actually the one that's pretty darn fast to make. So it's always fun when Rebecca's there and we say the right lines and the play goes on.
Awesome. Thank you all again so much for this.